I'm going to need a lot of this where I'm going.
Feel the spreading corruption burn.
Hello, MeAmNummers. And frankly, I did not think that this video was going to happen. If I'm going to be honest, I'm a little mad that it's the first real video that I'm putting on my channel, but I did kind of accidentally stumble upon this landmine on my own, and I thought, after having watched through the majority of it, that someone had to say something. And I guess that someone is me. So I was doing research for another video that's going to be about anime coming at some point. And I was digging around on this site called High Dive. I don't know if you've heard about it, but what I will say about it is that the interface has improved since the first time I've used it. As I was scrolling through and, adding stuff to my watch list, I stumbled upon this show called Redo of Healer. From the description alone, it didn't quite fit for the kind of show that I was doing research on, but, I decided to give it the college try and see, at least the first 2 episodes, which, of course, is my modus operandi. Now, most shows tend to be a roller coaster, with ups and downs and maybe a few left and right turns, and then it settles into like a satisfactory conclusion. This show goes a different way in that it is more like a ball of lead that is thrown into the ocean, and it just sinks and sinks, and even when you think it has hit the lowest point that it can, it just sinks further and further down into this dark abyss of nothingness and a void that just kind of sucks all life and happiness into it. I'm gonna stop talking. However, this particular ball of lead believes that it is a rocket ship. I'm not joking. Big disclaimer here in that the following video contains, and I'm so sorry I'm about to say this, it contains descriptions and discussions about and if that's not your cup of tea, or if you're about to go to bed and you want good vibes, then I would say just straight up bail from this video. And I'm about to roll the title card, but for those who are not ready but still want to watch, I'm sorry. And a top up of this. So I'll do my best to keep this relatively concise. But the show Redo of Healer is a show at its core about, and I'm sure the writers and creators of the show may say that it's a revenge story. But the main character only ever really uses revenge as a convenient excuse to perpetrate the horrible abuses that are about to follow. The meat of the show is a veritable mountain of... And the more that I talk about it, the more you'll realize how deep this rabbit hole really goes. So we begin by learning a few things. First is that our main character is a hero of the healing class, and second is that he's clearly indentured to his party members, as shown by the metal collar, and the other party members' open disdain for his existence. He then demonstrates that he has more power than the party realized, and uses that power to kill the Demon King, which I'd like to check the nomenclature on that. I think that is a misnomer. Once she's dead, he uses her heart to travel back in time to his younger self, but with all of the knowledge of what he had experienced still intact so that he can get his revenge on his old party members. This alluding to the redo part of the title of the show. Then we see how he came to get his abilities and about the specific nature of his powers, specifically what he has to go through in order to use them.
brain hurty.
This leads to the reveal that the royal family's kindness to him was a ploy all along, and that they had always planned on making him subservient to them. However, it's made clear through voiceover that our main character always knew that this would happen because of, what he remembered from his previous life. Then the story moves on to its second episode, and I'm not gonna show what happens in it, and honestly, I'm barely gonna describe what happens because of just how bone-chillingly horrible it is. But and again, I do apologize for what I'm about to say, but Protag is repeatedly and mercilessly abused and forced to get hooked on drugs, and this is done by basically anybody who is allowed into his cell by the first princess, the lady who perpetrated all of the bad stuff, from the royal family. The horror continues until there comes a point where he builds enough resistance to the effects of the drug that he's being given, which I'd like to talk about this a bit later, but that's not really how drugs work. And then he can finally get his revenge. And what is his revenge, you didn't ask? Well, that consists of escaping and using a false identity to isolate the first princess in her room, strip her naked, then break her fingers one by one as a penalty game, whereupon she loses and he makes her choose between... I'm just not going to describe what happens next. I think you can take a wild guess as to what he does, stuff that only a hero would do. But the really twisted thing happens after he gets his revenge, if you can believe it. He takes her and, using his weird and never well-defined healing powers that can, I guess, rewrite matter or something like that, he takes this power and rewrites her mind so that she becomes a smiling, gentle, but ultimately subservient girl that dotes on his every whim. I hope I don't have to explain why this is completely... He's using as a continual punishment to this woman, but brainwashing her so that she enjoys it, believing that it's consensual. Not only that, but he's also erased her entire backstory, everything she remembers and everybody she's ever known, just so that she ends up being the perfect sex puppet for him to enjoy, or according to the word he uses more frequently, toy. Yes, this person, our main character, uses the word toy to describe the women in his life. I'm sure I don't have to keep explaining why this guy's such a bad guy. So your next thought might be, well, the princess and all of her cronies, they did these things to him, and so he deserves to, be able to do them back, all right? Since they're such horrible people, they deserve it. Well, first off, let's get one thing absolutely clear. Should never, ever be used as a punishment. Ever. Go and talk to survivors or read their stories online. The destruction that can be done to someone through is not only extreme, but can irreparably damage their physical and psychological health for a long time, most likely the rest of their lives. Even if these things are done to you, I'd go out of my way to say that there's really no real justice if doing that back to that person. So all I would have just said seems pretty bad. But what we learned through the show is that this isn't just a one-off. Protag proves to us through the subsequent episodes that he intends to use against basically every one of the people on his list, and he does. Every single one. Need proof? Again, why, man, why? So one of the targets is a knight captain. He also... I'm not going to sweep this under the rug. He does massacre the main character's entire town that he used to live in, and does some unspeakables to a lady that the main character likes. To punish this knight captain, the protag uses his powers to straight up transform the knight captain into a woman. Then leaves the now female knight captain to be to death by a set of horrific monster men. Another hero turns out to be a lesbian, and so our protag dresses up as a woman to entrap her. This leads to protag literally eating dinner and drinking wine while watching as this hero, who really dislikes men, by the way, is again to death by a group of beast men. I mean, at this point, this isn't the story of someone getting revenge for past horrors. This is literally the story of a monster on the loose who uses physical violence, assault, against basically every woman he meets. This is behavior he perpetrates again and again, with no hint of remorse or guilt behind any of it, and in fact, he takes a rather sick pleasure in everything he does. Don't think that you get a fucking pass because of the little warning that you put in front of every episode. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that this content isn't even suitable for adults to watch. And here's the part that gets me the most. This is all framed like it's a good thing. Taking into account the color palette and art style, music choices, and framing, it seems to me like the producers of this show believe that the story is some triumphant hero's rise to greatness when it's actually a carnival of horrors from start to finish. That is what scares me a redo of Healer the most. It's all framed like it's normal or correct, even. I mean, here, so this is the music and framing that plays in the middle of a particularly horrible instance of assault. All that empty space makes me think that there is a version of this show out there where all of these horrible acts of violence that he perpetrates are put in full view. And guess what? I am not even going to attempt to seek it out. There is just no point to me looking at, because just how it looks on its own, without even seeing the real thing, just tells me that whoever created this show really put some horrifying things behind that. And the truth of the matter is, I don't want to find it. I don't think there's any artistic merit to finding this thing out there in the world at all. I'm not going to go so far as to say that, like, darkening the color palette, reworking the scripts to address the things that he's done, and replacing the music would make the subject matter acceptable. What I'm saying is that when these acts are framed this way specifically, viewers of all ages may get the mistaken impression that what's happening is fine or that it isn't seriously problematic. If you're a seasoned anime viewer, you may probably already be thinking of several depictions of awful sexual violence in the medium, as I did when I was writing out the script. But here's the thing, in all of the incidents that I could think about, none of them portrayed the assaulter in a good light, and none of the assaulters were the protagonist. Typically, the antagonist characters are the sleazy ones, and our protags are the ones who eventually stop the violence. None of them are done particularly well, in my opinion, and generally media at large doesn't really handle the topic very well. But at the very least, it's the antagonists, the enemies, who perpetrate the violence. And, like, I don't know if I'm remembering this correctly, but I think there's a scene where he, like, forces, like, a monster to, like, basically rape a bunch of guys in a pit. Am I mistaken? So all of what I just said also fails to mention the other toxic things that this show dares to put forward, like their complete failure to understand how addiction works, or their framing of homosexual characters as dangerous predators. Just when you think you've seen the worst that this show can offer, they somehow make it worse with every subsequent episode. Now, I'd like to talk a bit about the concept of villains as protagonists, and frankly, some of my favorite protagonists are villains. The difference, though, is this. When you compare the acts of characters like Momonga or Tanya Degorachov to the acts of the protag from Redo of Healer, there's one major difference between the two that instantly makes the former villains much better than the latter, and that is their choices. Let's begin with Momonga, or I I guess his name is Eins Ul Gaun, but I'm gonna call him Momonga. I'm a day one. He's a salaryman who gets pulled into the world of the game he plays, and is suddenly thrust into the role as the last supreme being of the Tomb of Nazareth. This means he now holds all of the responsibilities of leadership in a medieval type land, as well as being the leader of probably the most dangerous group of creatures in that whole world. His choices not only reflect the nature of the world around him, but also the things he needs to accomplish as a leader of powerful and bloodthirsty creatures. Let us also remember that while, yes, he does eliminate thousands of people en masse, a lot of those fights were ones thrust upon him, and in the end, his choices tend to lead to the later protection of the very same enemies he once defeated. That doesn't mean that he wasn't extremely cruel and heartless to the defeated, but that's the point of villains as protagonists. They're going to do horrible things, that's a given. But in the long run, their choices are supposed to have meaning and relevance to the story as a whole. If we move on to another favorite of mine, Tanya Degorachov from Saga of Tanya the Evil, this character also does a great deal of terrible things in her career.
Fucking hell. Direct. Target destroyed.
However, there are a few things that tend to lighten the emotional load on us as a viewer. Firstly, Tanya is living and fighting in a world that highly resembles Europe during the First World War, and if any of you have ever picked up a book about the subject or watched a documentary, you will know that those kinds of wars were a parade of human rights violations from start to finish. I don't know. I guess we just didn't know any better at the time. We figured it out, right? Secondly, the things she does are all really in pursuit of finally confronting the reason she's even in this world in the first place. Being X, or I suppose, God, or the concept of God. Tanya and this God character are in this interesting little debate where Being X believes that by reincarnating the protag in dire straits that she'll believe in God again, and Tanya fundamentally rejects the concept of God and intends to kill him. It's a revenge story, but unlike Redo of Healer, it's a revenge story with actual philosophies about theism, the nature of faith, and what's more, the dangers of seeking revenge. Think about it. Through Tanya's own actions during her quest to find and kill Being X, she's had to face more attempted revenges than anyone. I personally love that. In comparison to those two, one word makes all of what Protag and Redo of Healer does unacceptable. And it's, funnily enough, right in the title. Redo. He has the chance to go back, to restart his life with everything he remembers, and instead of doing literally anything else, he decides to willingly throw himself back into the horrible and toxic environment where his hatred was forged, just to attempt his stupid revenge again. It's something I kept angrily thinking about every time I watched him carve every single sin into his soul, that it was all his choice, that this is all because of him and the path he decided to take. The way he went about his revenge and the things he allowed himself to do in order to satisfy this dark urge set him aside as not only a villain protagonist, but as a monster protagonist. Now, normally this is the part where a reviewer would say, this show is irredeemable and horrible and needs to be taken off of High Dive, full stop. However, since I've taken on the role of critic, I need to adhere to my own personal ethos whenever I engage in critique. God, that I don't destroy, but I build up as well. I think it's really important whenever you're going to critique something that you don't just say, I don't think this thing is good, I think it's bad, and that's it. To me, that isn't proper criticism because it's neither descriptive of the things you didn't like in particular, nor does it offer up any real guidance as to how to make that thing better. personally, if I ever see critique that is just like all bad, no upsides, I just tend to kind of throw it away because it just tells me that whoever produced that thing just doesn't know how to engage in proper critique. That being said, it was a little tough for me to do the same thing with Redo of Healer because just kind of at its core, I didn't really engage with, nor did I agree with the original premise. But I'm going to stick to my morals, despite the fact that the main character has none. Other sip of this. And I'm going to build up. If we want to break from the show's initial premise entirely, I would put all of the evidence of like the horrible stuff at the beginning episode, the very first one. And once he achieves his redo, he just kind of circumnavigates everything, you know, because he has kind of a roadmap of what's about to happen to get him to the point where he wants to do his redo. So what if he just gets around it? You know, he doesn't even like follow the same path. And if he does have to, you know, kill off the people who were mean to him in his first life, you know, he can just do it in the typical anime fashion, which is just one-on-one spectacle fights. Would it be interesting? No. But would it be problematic? No. Hopefully. If I'm forced to follow the story more closely. All right, so in the second episode, during his revenge on the first princess, he says this line, and I'm so sorry that I'm going to repeat this. Disgusting pigs like you could never make me hard in the first place. Sorry about this. What if we play on that a bit? You know, because a lot of folks, when they're imagining their revenge on someone, they think up these like horrible, awful things that they're going to do to someone else. But a lot of times once they actually like confront them and they actually get there and they have to come face to face with the things that they're about to do, they get cold feet because, you know, in people's hearts, they're not as evil as they think they are. You know, they think that they can do these things because someone slighted them. But I think at the end of the day, most people realize that the emotional weight of doing the things that they envisioned just isn't worth it. So what if the main character actually feels this way, but they don't know it yet? Then, moving forward, he abandons the initial assault, like that's happening in that second episode that I hate so much. And he thinks that if he uses his powers to change her into, you know, being kind and subservient, that he can finally get his revenge. You know, maybe like because she's evil, maybe if he changes her into being nice. But once he does that and he's actually in the scene and he sees how different she is, a sudden realization hits him that the first princess and the protag have switched places. Now, she is the kind and unsuspecting innocent, and he is the evil and abusive manipulator. He feels this like sudden wave of shame and guilt, right? And instead of going through with his revenge, he takes her and just flees the city. After a bit, he like finds a nice little village and tells the people, hey, listen, I found this girl all alone in the forest, but she's really nice and could fit in just fine in your little town. And they accept her. That's kind of interesting if you think about it, right? Because like in the main character's redo, the first princess also gets a redo. If we play a little bit more with what's already there, in the original anime, there's a scene where someone mentions the first princess's younger sister in passing, and even though the first princess had her memories erased, remember, and like all of her personality, she still visibly reacted to it in a negative way, you know, the name of her younger sister. What if in that moment, in the like new imaginary version that we're concocting, she reawakened to her original memories, but now has the new disposition of being kind and gentle. She tells him, or I guess she tells protagonist, like, hey, by the way, I reawakened to my old memories back when I heard my sister's name, but check it. I want to be good. I enjoy being this way, and I'm going to stay in this town. But you need to go, and you need to, I guess, like, break the empire, because that's like how I became so awful, and how like everyone from the empire is so awful.
Now, thou art too of vile blood.
Hang on a second. There's a plate of digestives on this desk. Oh yeah, that's good. So, because of that, he sets off on this whole other journey to basically break the empire and to find the other perpetrators. But with the knowledge that it's really the empire to blame, and instead of seeking revenge, he embarks on a journey of rectification, of forgiveness. Despite everything they did to him in his previous life, he takes the massive step of not only confronting his trauma and his suffering and coming to terms with it, but simultaneously reforming his tormentors into good people. Or, if they're too far gone, he can just take them out. In this way, this would make the protag more sympathetic and honorable. And even if he ends up killing a lot of people in the pursuit of rebuilding the empire, he'll have a lot more emotional leeway that you wouldn't get if he were to perpetrate the sexual assault of basically every woman he interacts with, which is actually what happens in this motherfucking dumpster fire type of hurricane. I don't know, man. I'm just so tired of thinking of this show. The moment I'm done hitting record, the moment I'm done with the edit, which hopefully doesn't take that long, and the moment it's posted, I'm just gonna like go ahead and forget that this show exists. Here's the thing though, is I'm of a mind that it's better to know than to not know about all the awful things in the world. So if you have a show that you think is similar, or that just kind of passes under everybody else's radar and needs to be exposed, put it in the comments. I want to know. I want to look at it and kind of see if I see the same things you did. And I want to kind of find similar things out there. No matter how weird it is, just go ahead and put it in the comments. I'll take a look at it and maybe I'll make a video on it. I'm just glad to be, at the end of this. How am I supposed to end this video? What do I say? Get out of my apartment.